one of the pathways for us is renewable hydrogen. So making hydrogen instead of from natural gas, making hydrogen via the electrolysis of water using renewable electricity. And Orica is looking at developing a project to do that through our Hunter Valley Hydrogen Hub. This sort of first phase, we're looking at 50 megawatt electrolysers, which would displace 7.5% of our natural gas feedstock. And this is a big project in an Australian context in terms of hydrogen, but is relatively small in terms of what it can do to sort of decarbonise that asset. So when I think about the challenges, I guess that scale piece is really important. And when you're trying to transition a big world scale manufacturing facility, these technological solutions that currently exist in sort of in miniature almost. And to deploy them with any sort of commerciality, it has to be done in a phased approach. So there's a real sort of underlying challenge. I guess we've heard a lot this morning around sort of needing to accelerate the transition and bring things forward faster, but in the sort of industrial context where there's big sort of scale needed, the only way to do this is really in a stepped approach, and that is going to take time. So that time piece is also really important from a sort of policy certainty perspective as well. So big assets are making decisions, sort of 5-10 year planning cycles, long asset lives, and you really need to have the confidence when you make those original investment decisions that the policy settings that you've made them under will hold for the life of that project.
So what should our priorities be? Well, first we need to continue to be a reliable exporter, because people won't trust us in future if we lose their trust today. Whilst we get current domestic Australian energy costs down, so that we have industries, the industries that we still have are viable enough to consider these very large investments, as Deb and Meredith have discussed, but also to attract new industries, as our low energy costs once helped do. So that means that I think most immediately gas reservation is essential and urgent, and I think lots of people are saying that today, including the previous panel. Industrial energy costs are roughly 50-50 electricity and gas, but wholesale gas prices affect both. With the potential exception of aluminium smelting, gas prices also dominate the economics of heavy industry. So this also means that government schemes must include incentives for gas-powered electrical generation capacity. Note that I didn't say gas-powered electricity. Capacity and energy are different things. Only megawatt hours translate to greenhouse gas emissions, but we must put an end to what I think is an ideological view that firming can't include gas. The consequence of that view is that firming instead relies on old coal, pure and simple. Second, and to support very much what's already been said, paying the green premium is key. I'm personally unconvinced that many clean products will ever match their fossil equivalents on price without support. Now, that's not a case for saying we shouldn't do them, but rather it's a case for focusing on what industries achieve lower cost and more significant abatement without offshoring. So, for example, should we have local content rules mandating a percentage of low emission Aussie steel, polysilicon, and that would be a new industry, or maybe better still, full PV modules, given the incredible growth of PV globally that's happening right now, or marine fuels that might also diffuse into our trains and trucks once trains and trucks have regulated emissions. What about an Aussie CBAM? We know we're talking about that now. Thirdly, we need to develop and implement regional plans. These things, as we all know, have natural monopolies everywhere, so careful planning is needed to maximise utilisation by co-location. That means industrial hubs. And concessional financing of these hubs may be raised in part from an Aussie CBAM and invested in shared infrastructure. So that might be renewables, batteries, firming, gas and batteries, transmission of electricity, natural gas for sure, maybe CO2 and hydrogen, all co-located for groups of heavy industrial energy users.
Pilbara iron ore is approximately 50% of global iron ore, and that style of iron ore is north of 90% of iron ore that's mined globally. For Australia, it's our number one export industry. It's 4.5% of GDP, and it's associated with hundreds of thousands of jobs. And so when we're looking at the role of the steel industry in a lower emissions future, it's about also how can we actually secure a future for our Australian iron ore industry. And so given that that existing technology is actually not suitable for the Pilbara iron ores, what we're working on in a joint venture is a technology called the NeoSmelt project. And that's a technology, it's a DRI technology, which we're adapting electric smelting furnace that we operate in New Zealand across to those medium grade Pilbara iron ores. So it's tailored to Pilbara iron ore to realise that 60% emissions reduction, and we're going to proliferate that technology. We're going to give it away. So we really want the global industry to adopt this technology as they're facing over the next decade their decisions around blast furnace relines. We want to make sure we've actually created an opportunity for them to adopt a different technology that has a significantly lower CO2 emissions profile associated with it. And so while we're doing the work on the technology, we've got the pilot plant that's under feasibility study at the moment and looking to move towards final investment decision at the end of this year. Ultimately, to move across to that technology, we need the energy and the policy settings that's going to support it.
A key enabler is allowing the market to decide where investment should happen. And so what we're hearing from investors, IGCC that spoke earlier, they did a survey as well of investors late last year, and the messaging for investors is clear. They want decarbonisation plans for businesses that are based on financial realism, not based on opportunity. And so what this means and what this can result in some of our current environments are large subsidies being provided for projects that are maybe not going to be economic in the future. And I'm not saying we don't need subsidies, because we certainly do, particularly with some of the projects that have been spoken about, that Deb's spoken about, that technology is going to be given away for free, and that's about evolving and moving the market. But I think we need to let the market decide where investment should be spent and which products they see value in. So an example of this is, if you look at some of Australia's hydrogen projects, this is a stat someone shared with me recently, which I found fascinating. If you take a typical hydrogen project, maybe it will cost you $500 million, and you look at the amount of CO2 reduction that hydrogen project can deliver you over a 12-month period. And then if you compare, if you invested $500 million in CCS, CCS will give you the same amount, a typical CCS plant, like maybe Moomba, for example, that Santos operates, they'll give you the same amount of CO2 reduction. Anyone want to make a guess in how many days? Hydrogen plant, 1 year life cycle emissions, CCS, how many days equivalent of carbon sequestration? 6 days. And so when you start to look at some of those solutions, and I just wanted to point out that I think we need everything in our toolbox. There is no easy win here. We need to be progressing technologies like hydrogen because they have a future, but then we also need to be discounting some of the more cost-effective technologies that can help us decarbonise at scale today.